Hi everyone. One of the things that I've decided to do this year is to share online things that I'm already sharing in my church in Bible studies and in preaching. And one of the things that I really have been wanting to share is about the power of prayer. Prayer is one of those things that is really like a roller coaster. I mean, there's times where things are high and good, and we're praying and we're seeing God move and we're seeing responses to our prayers. And then there's other times where it's kind of like we're in this low period where we're not seeing the things that we'd like to see, and maybe we could be doing a better job at praying, or maybe we sometimes are just too tired and forget to pray. But through it all, I have learned that prayer really does impact our lives. Prayer really does change the world around us. And there are so many things that could be said about prayer. But one thing that I have really enjoyed learning about is about how God moves through prayer. Now, I have heard many times that people call responses to prayer just coincidence. And, to be fair, there are a lot of coincidences that happen in life. Sometimes something happens and it's like, okay, that really is just a coincidence. But I believe that there are other times where it really is God's hand working in our lives. There is this man, his name was Archbishop William Temple, and there were people who were criticizing him and saying, well, prayer that you say has been answered really is just coincidence. And you know what he told them? He said, when I pray, coincidences happen. And when I don't, they don't. That's the thing about prayer. When we are praying, we're openly looking for God working in our lives. And when we're not praying, well, we don't see Him. Of all the stories in the Bible, there is one that I really believe teaches about how God works through prayer. In the book of Ruth, we're introduced to Naomi, a woman who has lost her husband and her sons and is left with nothing except her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And they are coming back from a foreign land. They have nothing, they have no one, and they're completely abandoned. And there's one point in the book where Naomi makes a prayer for Ruth and Orpah, her daughters-in-law. And I believe that the rest of this book is the unfolding of that one prayer. It's found in Ruth chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband." I don't think Naomi really realized it, but God was already beginning to work on her behalf in response to this prayer. There's a lot of things that happen in the book of Ruth, but if I were to briefly summarize it, it would go something along like this. By chance, Naomi and Ruth came back from Moab at the time of the barley harvest. And by chance, Naomi still had a living relative who could marry Ruth and redeem her as the nearest kinsman. By chance, Ruth goes to that very field, and by chance, on the same day, they find each other. By chance, Boaz has heard of all of the things that Ruth has done for her mother-in-law, and how she came with her from a foreign land, and how she left her gods, and how she left her people, and how she decided to become part of the people of Israel. And by chance, all of these chances aren't really chances. All these coincidences really aren't coincidental. And as the story progresses, we quickly see that God is working behind the scenes. And not once in the whole book does the author himself ever say, God did this or God did that. God is very silent in the story, actually. You have the people themselves saying, oh, may the Lord do this or may the Lord do that. But the author himself really only records once something that God did, and it's found all the way at the end in chapter 4. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. This one moment in the story is the redemption of Ruth and Naomi. And how coincidental is it that this son is Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David, the greatest king that Israel ever had? For me, that's a coincidence that just wasn't. So what does your prayer life look like? I encourage you, begin time to pray. I mean, it doesn't take more than a couple minutes, yet it has huge implications as to what God can do in your life. When we're not looking for God's hand in our lives, things just seem like coincidences and normal. But when we do pray, we begin to realize that a lot of the things that happen in our lives are the active hand of God working in it. You know, there's this interesting and almost cryptic proverb that we find in the Bible, and it says, "We may cast the dice, but the Lord determines where they fall." Sometimes in life, we do things without thinking twice about it, and sometimes we do things with a lot of thought. But when we pray, we allow God to take the everyday actions that we do and to turn them into something that glorifies His name and expands His kingdom here on earth. So learn to pray. Prayer really does change the things around you. I hope you were blessed by this little devotional. I'm going to try to keep on doing things like this, things that are close to my heart. But if you were, just feel free to share and send it to someone who you